it's very different reading a play rather than going to a play, or reading a movie rather than seeing a movie, right? I don't know if you've had the experience of going to reading a book first of all, and then going to the movie of the book and being a little bit disappointed. That's because there's a big disconnect between the finished script or the finished play and the production of that play or script. You know, when you're reading the book, in your mind's eye, you are imagining the characters, what they look like, how they're acting, how they're dressed, where they're interacting. And when you go to see the production, you are seeing someone else's interpretation of the material. And that's kind of what happens with plays. You know, an author who finishes a novel or a short story, or a poet who finishes a poem, can be satisfied that what he sends off to the publisher then is complete, is what he intends it to be. But a playwright doesn't have that luxury. It's really only a launching pad for the director, who then overlays his vision, for the actors who then interpret the dialogue in their own way, the costume designer, the lighting designer, the set designer. All of those people get involved to create something that is other than what the finished play sitting there typed out in its script would entail. So when we read it, we're not really reading the completed form of the art, are we? I mean, there are certain plays called closet dramas that are never intended for performance, but these are fairly rare. And what we're reading are plays that are intended for performance. So we have to kind of do a little bit more work when we're reading the play in order to make it come alive, as if it were on stage, as if it were being performed. You know, when we read the dialogue in our head, you know, for example, in Trifles, when Mrs. Hale says, farmers' wives have their hands full. I think she actually says, farmers' wives have their hands full, Mr. Henderson. It's very easy to just read that and not think too much about it. But it's a kind of a key line because, you know, the men have come into the farmhouse and they've started to belittle the kitchen, the work that women do, the stuff in the kitchen. And, you know, the women are starting to get a little bit defensive. And so if an actress took that line and said it with a little bit of pointedness, and I'm no actress, believe me, but if she were to say it like something like, farmers' wives have their hands full, Mr. Henderson, and again, a professional would do a much better job than that, but when they imbue it with a little bit of tone, the line becomes a little bit more important, a little more significant, because she's not only sympathizing now with Mrs. Wright, becoming complicit with Mrs. Wright and her actions, but she's also casting aspersions on the men. She's also saying, you know, you think we don't do much. You think what we're working with here are trifling things, but, and of course the ultimate irony is that the women discover some very important details and clues in those trifling things. So the way the line is delivered, that would be the actor and the director and all of those elements that make up a set of production, we need to think about when we're reading. So here are some questions to think about when you're looking at a play, when you're reading a play, just to help you get a little bit more out of the play. So first of all, obviously, did you enjoy it? You know, what is your reaction to it? What pleased you or displeased you? And be specific. What elements, what actual elements made you feel either negative or positive, or intrigued you, or disgusted you, or whatever the case may be. And you know, it's not just, oh, I finished another play. Thank goodness. It's not, you know, I'm not interested in the relief you might feel. I want you to think about the play itself. What was the visceral reaction to it? What are your emotions after it? Of course, you have to look at the title. right? I mean, authors, poets, playwrights choose these titles particularly, and they're significant. So you want to look for reflections of that title, repetitions of the title, things that have to do with the title, and then how do they suggest the theme or the emphasis of the play. You know, I think Mr. Hale says, nothing here but kitchen things. No, sorry, it's the sheriff. Nothing here but kitchen things. So because we know what trifles means, which is, of course, small, insignificant details that mean nothing, that are unimportant. And of course, because all of the elements, all of the details in the kitchen are you know, summarily dismissed by the men, nothing here but kitchen things, that's an indication of what Glaspell is intending in that play. It's a little signal to the reader to say, look, this little detail, the way they're dismissive of this, is significant. It helps us understand what the characters, how they're motivated, why they're acting the way they are, and what Glaspell is saying about characters or the world. It's really easy to overlook the stage directions. They're the little, often italicized directions set in brackets right after the character's name. And they help us figure out what's going on, not only in our mind's eye as we're envisioning the actions in the play, but also thematically sometimes too. They could be descriptive characterizations, you know, how does the character say something, like, let me see if I can find it fairly quickly. It's the county attorney in Trifles delivers a line with the gallantry of a young politician. Right? So if we miss that little indication, we miss quite a lot of the play. Also in Trifles, it's the stage directions that tell us that the women are moving closer and closer together. And of course, thematically, they move closer and closer together as well. In Naked Lunch, when we're told that Vernon has placed a vase of flowers on the table that is either too big or too little, that's significant. So those little set directions, those stage directions, help us figure out more about what's going on in the play and maybe even what the play means. What about exposition? Remember, exposition are those details that are included to help us understand what went on in the past. You know, we have a whole story being told by Hale in Trifles, who tells us what happened when he discovered Mr. Wright's body and what Mrs. Wright was doing. So all of that exposition is important for us to put context now onto the investigation of the crime. But why didn't Glaspell include it? Again, in A Doll's House, we don't hear anything about, the action of the play doesn't cover anything about Nora's crime, but we hear about it through exposition. So why did Ibsen not include it? How does that then change the focus of the play and the emphasis of the play if we don't have that information? So consider what happened before, how that helps us make sense of the play, and what it means that the author or playwright didn't include it. Also consider the setting. Setting is, as always, is important. What would happen if you changed the setting? Would Trifles still be the same play if it was set in the 1970s in a condo in Florida, in Miami? Why is it significant that it's in a lonely, cold farmhouse in middle America in the middle of winter? Farmhouse is physically in a hollow. How does that reinforce the themes that Glaspell is bringing out? Again, is it important that, and when I say is it, I mean it is, that A Doll's House is set at Christmas time? What does that mean? Consider who the protagonist is, of course. Who is the character with whom you feel the most emotional affinity? You may or may not like this character. It may not be a character that you would like to buddy around with, but which one is the protagonist? And what is that protagonist trying to achieve? And then who is against the protagonist? Is it another character? Is it a group of characters? Is it an idea like society that one character represents? Who is the antagonist, or what is the antagonist? And then, of course, what are the conflicts, but what's the major conflict that the protagonist faces? What is it that the protagonist wants? And is the protagonist successful in getting what she wants, or is she not? Consider how the playwright reveals character. You know, are there physical descriptions of the character? Are there names that the characters go by, or nicknames? You know, it's significant in Rodeo that Big 8 is the protagonist's nickname, and it's very different and evocative compared to her real name. What actions or words help characterize the character, or what do other characters say about the character? You know, in Trifles, we never do meet Mrs. Wright, and yet all of the other characters say enough that we get a good sense of who she is, you know, what she even looked like, and also what motivated her actions. So think about how the playwright is revealing the character to us. Let's change slides. Okay, what about minor characters? Why are they in the play at all? And are they individualized? You know, do we know much about these characters, or do they primarily represent ideas or attitudes? You know, you think about Dr. Rank in A Doll's House. Why is he there? Is he, you know, significant in and of himself, or does he represent something? Is he acting as a foil in that role? You know, he doesn't have a lot to say. We don't know much about him, but he does help us understand certain themes that Ibsen is trying to explore. So minor characters, again, nothing is accidental. You know, at this level, at the level of literature that we're exploring, everything is purposeful. The authors, the playwrights, put the material in the play because it's required, it's necessary. So think about the minor characters and what role they're performing. Consider your response to the characters over the course of the play. And I know that, you know, some of the plays that you're reading are very, very short, but still, you know, does your response to Vernon in Naked Lunch change over the course of the play? Does he become a little more fanatical, a little more ominous? Because we're more, well, and then ask yourself why. Why does your response change? Has the character changed, or have we simply just been given more information about the character? What about A Doll's House? You know, how do you feel about Krogstad at the beginning of the play versus the end of the play? Does your response to him change? What about Torvald Helmer? How does your response to him change? Does he change over the course of the play? Or do what we know about him, does what we know about him change? When the characters change, or when our responses change to them, that's significant. The playwright is trying to help us see the journey of the characters in order to make some point about them. Again, you have to watch for repetition, and a lot of this is similar to what we talked about when we were looking at stories. And when we see words or images repeated, because nothing is accidental at this level of literature, the author is telling us to pay attention. So Anderson repeats the words "thank you" in her play The Reprimand several times. The characters say they thank each other several times. And don't you find that curious in a play like that? Why are they thanking each other? Do they really mean it? I mean, back when we were looking at stories and we found the husband in A Sorrowful Woman, remember, he was so sympathetic, he understood. Everything that Godwin said about him included some reference to how he understood, which made us start to question whether or not he really did understand. And I think you want to do the same thing in The Reprimand when the characters are thanking each other or thanking each other. I'm not sure they're actually really thankful. So watch for these repetitions. that occur in the plays. Again, look at symbols. What symbols do we see, and what might they stand for? Remember, a symbol is any action, character, setting, object that stands for something other than itself. And the plays are loaded with symbols. No, with symbols. Like the jar of preserves in trifles, right? I mean, the women make a big fuss about them because Mrs. Wright has made a big fuss, you know, did my preserves get frozen? And it's not, they don't really refer to the jar of cherries or the jam she made. They call them preserves, which is an old-fashioned word, but it's an also significant word because if it, you know, it's in some way stands for Mrs. Wright's ability to preserve her life, or the withering of her life, or the freezing of her life that she experienced in that dour farmhouse with the dour Mr. Wright. The flowers in Naked Lunch. You know, why does Orloff ask the director of the play, sorry, it was Hollinger on that one, why does he ask us to put the flowers in either too big or too small a vase? Why wouldn't Vernon have gotten it in a regular sized vase? Why is that important, and what do those flowers then mean? So look for symbols, because they help us understand a little bit more about the play. Consider this, if you were a director and you were going to stage the play, if you were going to set it up for performance, what decisions would you make? I don't know if you experienced when, after having read A Doll's House, then watching the movie A Doll's House, whether there was a disconnect there, whether you agreed with the choices the director made. You know, were the characters cast as you would have cast them? I know a lot of my students have said that the choice of Claire, I was going to say Claire Danes, but that's not her name. Anyway, the woman who plays Nora seems too old, and maybe that's the case in your mind's eye as well. How would you change it? You know, how would Shakespeare react to the production of Romeo and Juliet that starred Claire Danes, there she is, and Leonardo DiCaprio, that featured, you know, that was set in Los Angeles in modern day and featured, you know, Juliet wearing some wings on her back for significant scenes. You know, how would he react to that? What is the difference there? What do those choices mean? Does it bring new insight to the play? What would you do if you were casting a play, if you were directing a play, if you were setting a scene? And how would it be different? Mull it over in your mind to help you think more about the play and more about the themes in the play. And then, of course, as always, consider what your own experiences, values, beliefs, and assumptions do to your interpretation. You know, when you read something like Rodeo, does it make sense to you? Or do you disagree with Big 8? You know, it's a little bit dated. So maybe in the 15 or 20 years since the writing of that play, times have changed. Maybe it doesn't make sense anymore. Maybe, you know, the way that Rodeo has changed has meant that more and more people get to enjoy it, and it's a good thing. So how do you feel about the themes and the topics that are presented? You know, maybe you have your own ideas about what a parent owes a child, what a parent's responsibility is for its child, or his or her child, I should say. And how does that jive with what Ibsen says about it? What a parent should do for a child, or what a child should do for a parent. What happens when you bring in the material from a play to your own ideas about the world? And is there a change there or not? So think about these questions, and these are taken from your text, which you'll find more questions to consider in this section on writing about drama. So you're welcome to look at those to help you get more out of the plays that you're reading and maybe even enjoy them more.